The phone rang exactly at 2:47 p.m., cutting into what I was doing, preparing for the most important appointment I'd had since Ronald passed away 4 years ago. On the kitchen counter, I was organizing the list of questions for the cardiologist, writing down every symptom I'd been tracking these past weeks, those tight chest pains, the irregular heart rhythms, and the dizzy spells that had been growing more intense. "Mother Marcia, I need you to watch Zayden today. It's urgent." Tasha's voice came with that familiar tone, the one my daughter-in-law always used whenever she wanted me to immediately nod and follow her wishes, as if 60 years of living had all been preparation for me to become an on-call babysitter, not the grandmother of my grandson. "Tasha, today I can't. I have a doctor's appointment at 4, and I've waited exactly 3 weeks for it." "What appointment is it, Mom?" "Cardiology. I've got some concerning symptoms and—" "Mother Marcia, this is truly urgent. My boss scheduled an emergency meeting about the quarterly report. I have to be there or I'll lose my job." Her voice rose, laced with that deliberate kind of desperation, the kind she used to make her problems sound more serious than any of mine. "Can't you reschedule the appointment? I think you should see that Zayden is more important than a doctor's visit." The blow came fast and direct, like a strike to the chest. In the 4 years since Ronald died, I had tried to rebuild my life with balance and firm boundaries. I had learned that if I kept saying yes to every request, every crisis, every responsibility that wasn't mine, I would burn out, then grow resentful. And in the end, no one in the family benefits from a grandmother who is exhausted. "Tasha, my health also has to be a priority. I'm not being selfish for taking care of myself." "Well, you are being selfish. You're putting your convenience above the needs of the family. What kind of grandmother does that?" My chest tightened. I wasn't sure if it was anger or the very heart symptoms I was trying to diagnose. The kind of grandmother who wants to stay healthy so she can live long enough for her grandson, Tasha. "Fine then, Mother Marcia. I hope that precious doctor's appointment is worth abandoning the family when we need you most." She hung up. Only the cold, empty beep stayed behind, leaving me standing in the kitchen holding my phone, swallowing that familiar guilt twisting in my stomach. Tasha had a strange talent, turning her lack of preparation into proof of my inadequacy, turning her problems into my moral failings, turning everything she wanted into an obligation I was not allowed to refuse. But I had learned, thanks to the months of therapy after Ronald passed, that other people's emergencies are not automatically my responsibility, especially when those emergencies seem to appear suspiciously often whenever Tasha wants something from me. I glanced at the clock. 3:15. I needed to leave in 30 minutes. I still had to gather the medical records Dr. Martinez requested and find parking in downtown Charlotte. The phone buzzed. A message from Jamal. "Mom, can you help Tasha watch Zayden today? She's really stressed about work." I responded immediately. "I can't today. I have an important doctor's appointment. Try asking Keisha." Keisha, Tasha's younger sister, a full-time mom with a flexible schedule, living only 20 minutes away. "Keisha's not free. Come on, Mom. Family comes first." Family comes first. That phrase, Tasha and Jamal used it like an incantation whenever they wanted me to drop everything. As if since the day Ronald died, I was no longer an independent person, only the backup plan for every problem they could have avoided with better planning. I turned off the ringer, closed the folder, took a deep breath, and finished the remaining tasks. By 3:45, I stepped into the car, locked the door, and drove toward downtown Charlotte for an appointment that might determine whether these recent symptoms were just stress or something more serious that I had ignored for far too long. If you think Tasha's call was the only boundary crossed today, the story is only just beginning. Because just a few hours later, something unexpected happened, something that would change the future of Zayden, of Jamal, and of myself. The cardiology clinic was packed that day. Everyone carried their own story of illness and their own private fears. people who had chosen to prioritize their health despite the countless responsibilities waiting for them outside. "Mrs. Marshall." The nurse glanced back at the file, immediately correcting herself. "Sorry, Mrs. Ellington. Dr. Martinez will see you now." I sat inside the small examination room where the smell of disinfectant blended with the scent of new paper and the faint lavender essential oil they used to ease anxiety. My hands trembled slightly as Dr. Martinez walked in. A graying man in his 50s, his face serious, but his eyes kind. "Mrs. Ellington," he said as he sat down, "I've reviewed the symptoms you described on the phone. Now tell me in more detail about the chest pains." I took a long, steady breath. It started about 3 months ago. At first, it was just a mild tightness. I thought it was stress. But recently, it's gotten worse. One day I was cooking and suddenly felt like something was pressing heavily on my chest. I couldn't breathe. It lasted almost 10 minutes. "When do the pains usually occur?" "Early in the morning, around 4 or 5. They wake me up. My heart pounds, uneven. I have to sit up and breathe slowly to calm it down." I hesitated, my voice dropping. "Doctor, my husband died from a heart attack 4 years ago." Dr. Martinez took careful notes. "Ronald Ellington. I have his records here. He passed at 58, correct?" "Yes." My throat tightened. Ronald always thought the chest pain was just from irregular meals, from stress at the finance firm. He kept putting off getting checked. By the time he finally agreed to go, I stopped. The memory wrapped around me again. Ronald lying on the floor, face pale, his hand gripping his chest. My voice trembling as I called for help. The sirens, the harsh white hospital lights. The doctor's face as he walked out. One look, and I knew the answer. "You were right to come in early," Dr. Martinez said gently. "With that family history and the symptoms you're experiencing, I want to run a stress test and an echocardiogram. I'll schedule them for next week. Is it serious? If the symptoms worsen or become more frequent, you must go to the ER immediately. Don't wait for the appointment." He handed me a stack of documents, the appointment slips, and a reassuring look that still couldn't hide the professional concern in his eyes. "Mrs. Ellington, you did the right thing by not delaying." I drove home feeling both relieved because choosing to prioritize my health was the right call, and worried about what next week's results might reveal. Ronald had ignored the signs for months, thinking it was only indigestion. By the time he decided to get checked, his heart was too damaged to save. There are moments in life when we think we are in control, but in truth, we're simply standing on a cliff's edge without realizing it. And I had no idea that only a few hours later, the next phone call would drag me away from that edge and throw me into the center of a nightmare no family ever wants to face. At 6:30 p.m., the phone rang. Tasha's name flashed on the screen. I picked up, half expecting her to check on me, half expecting her to apologize for earlier. But the first thing she said made my blood freeze. "Mother Marcia, where is Zayden?" For a second I thought I misheard. "What do you mean? Where is he?" "He's with you. I sent him to your house by Uber 2 hours ago, but you didn't open the door." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "Tasha, I told you clearly I couldn't watch him today. I was at the doctor's." "I still sent him." Her voice held that accusatory tone, as if she were the one being wronged. "The Uber driver was supposed to drop him at 412 Maple Street at 4:30. He should have been there when you got home." I froze. 412 Maple Street was my house. But at 4:30, I was in the cardiology clinic. Then I stopped by the grocery store. And far more important than any of that, Tasha had put a 6-year-old child in an Uber, written the address on a slip of paper, and sent him alone, without my consent. Tasha, if the driver dropped him here, he should have been sitting on the porch, but he wasn't when I got back. Well, I don't see him either. I'm standing here right now. You didn't open the door, and he's nowhere. Panic tightened around me. "Are you certain you wrote the correct address?" "Of course. I wrote it on paper, 412 Maple Street." "What's the driver's name? Do you still have the Uber receipt?" I deleted the app after booking. I don't know the driver's name or the car or anything. My heart clenched. I understood the level of danger immediately. Tasha had placed Zayden, a 6-year-old boy, into a stranger's car. No information, no tracking, no transaction records, no way to know where he had been taken. Tasha, we have to call the police immediately. The police? Mother Marcia, this is your fault. If you had just watched him like you were supposed to... Even when her child was missing, Tasha's first instinct was still to blame me. But I didn't have time to respond to her absurdity. Tasha, hang up and call 911 right now. Report him missing and give them anything you have. I'll call 911 from my phone too. I dialed emergency services, my eyes fixed on the empty street in front of my house, trying to piece together what had gone wrong with Tasha's manipulative plan, a plan that had now spun far beyond her control. Some mistakes only affect one person, but some mistakes ripple outward like waves, pulling innocent people under. And today, that consequence had fallen on my 6-year-old grandson. 911, what's your emergency? My grandson is missing, 6 years old, Zayden Ellington. His mother put him in an Uber to my house, but he never arrived. My voice was shaking violently, my hand gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Do you have any information about the ride, the driver's name, license plate? No. His mother deleted the app. We don't have anything. I heard frantic typing on the other end. Officers are on their way. Where are you right now? 412 Maple Street, Charlotte, Dilworth neighborhood. Please stay right there. Don't go anywhere. The child may be trying to find his way back. I hung up and rushed out onto the front porch. The October afternoon sky was turning a reddish orange. Craftsman-style houses lined the quiet street, each with its own front porch and white picket fence. A few neighbors were watering their plants, walking their dogs. None of them was a lost 6-year-old child. I ran over to Mrs. Chen's house at 414. Mrs. Chen, did you see any child being dropped off around here at about 4:30? Mrs. Chen, 70 years old, still holding a watering can over her roses, turned back to me in surprise. A child? No, but I did see an Uber driving slowly, stopping a few times like it was looking for an address. Did you see a child in the car? I'm not sure. I was cooking at the time, only glanced out when I heard the engine idling. Which way did the car go? I think it headed toward Moorhead. I thanked her and turned back just as a police car pulled up in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out, a woman in her 40s with serious but understanding eyes, and a younger man already taking notes. Mrs. Ellington, I'm Officer Rodriguez. This is Officer Patterson. Please walk us through everything that happened. We went inside. Rodriguez opened her notebook. What time did your daughter-in-law call asking you to watch your grandson? 2:47. I remember because I was getting ready to go to my heart appointment at 4. And you refused because you had a medical appointment? Yes. I'd been waiting 3 weeks to be seen about serious heart symptoms. I could hear my own voice getting smaller, as if I had to defend the correctness of my own decision. How did your daughter-in-law react? Tasha was angry. She accused me of being selfish for prioritizing my own health. Rodriguez wrote it down without a trace of judgment. When did Tasha tell you she had sent Zayden in an Uber? 6:30. She called asking where he was, assuming he'd been dropped at my house and that I hadn't opened the door. So the child had been missing for nearly 2 hours before anyone realized it. That number hit me like a cold knife to the gut. In those 2 hours, Zayden, only 6, could have been terrified, lost, with no one by his side. Patterson came back in after speaking to the neighbors. No one saw a child dropped off in this area, but Mrs. Chen at 414 did see an Uber stop and seemed to look for a house number. Did she see the child? I asked again. Not clearly. She just heard the engine and glanced out. Rodriguez closed her notebook. We've issued an alert for 6-year-old Zayden Ellington. We're contacting Uber to get the ride information. Because there's no booking data on your end, it may take a little time. What can I do to help? Stay here in case he finds his way back. And keep your phone with you. She paused, her voice turning firm. "Mrs. Ellington, under these circumstances, a child endangerment investigation is necessary." The meaning was clear. Tasha could be facing criminal charges. After the officers left, I sat on the living room couch, my eyes never leaving the phone. Anxiety pressed down on me. The cardiology appointment Tasha had wanted me to cancel had revealed serious heart concerns. But her anger at me for not doing what she wanted had led her to put Zayden in danger. 8:15 p.m. The phone buzzed again. Jamal's name appeared. "Mom, Tasha says Zayden's missing. What's going on?" "Your wife sent Zayden in an Uber to my house without telling me, even though I clearly said I couldn't watch him. But Mom, why didn't you—" "Jamal!" My voice hardened, so clear and firm that it surprised even me. Stop right there. For 4 years, I had tried to keep the peace in this family, even if it meant pushing my own needs aside. But not tonight. "My son is missing because your wife made a reckless decision after I told her I wouldn't be home. Do not blame me." There was silence on the other end. "The police are investigating child endangerment, Jamal. Your wife could be prosecuted." "Prosecuted? Mom, that sounds a little extreme." "What's extreme is putting a 6-year-old child into a stranger's car and then deleting all evidence of the ride. What's extreme is not checking on your child for 2 hours." The doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Officer Rodriguez standing there with a woman holding a clipboard. "Jamal, I have to go. The police are here." I opened the door. Rodriguez introduced her. "Mrs. Ellington, this is Jennifer Santos from Child Protective Services. We've located Zayden." The wave of relief hit so hard I had to grab the doorframe for support. "Is he okay? Where is he?" "Physically, he's fine," Ms. Santos said. "But he's frightened and confused. The Uber driver misread the handwritten address and dropped him at 412 Maple Avenue instead of 412 Maple Street." "Maple Avenue?" I almost whispered. "That's a vacant house in a transitioning neighborhood. A neighbor saw a child sitting on the steps alone after dark and called the police." "Oh my God," Rodriguez read from her notes. "The good news is, he's safe. The concerning part is he was unsupervised for over 3 hours, and according to the Uber records and a social media post, Tasha Merritt booked the ride while attending a friend's birthday party at a downtown club." "A club?" I stared. Santos nodded. "We have her Instagram photos from 5 to 7 p.m. While her son was missing, she told officers it was a work crisis." That lie hit me like a bucket of ice water. "Where is he now?" "At the station, with a victim support worker. And, given the situation, we need to discuss temporary custody." "Temporary custody?" "Yes. In child endangerment cases, the child must stay with a responsible caregiver while we investigate." Rodriguez looked at me, her gaze softening. "Mrs. Ellington, would you be willing to care for Zayden? He's been asking for his grandmother since we found him." I thought of my heart, the stress test next week, the quiet life I'd tried to build since Ronald died. Then I thought of Zayden, 6 years old, curled up at a police station, abandoned by the very mother who was supposed to protect him. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "I'll take care of him." Some crises, I am learning, are worth letting your life be disrupted for. And sometimes a woman's no leads to a situation where saying yes is the only truly compassionate choice left. The sight of Zayden at the police station broke my heart in ways I hadn't expected. He was sitting on a small child-sized chair in a brightly painted yellow room, his hands gripping a juice box, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen him. Zayden's short, curly hair was a mess, and he was still wearing the same school uniform he'd had on that morning, as if that ordinary morning belonged to another lifetime, when the biggest annoyance was Tasha's inconvenient babysitting requests. "Grandma Marcia!" Zayden ran into my arms the moment he saw me, his 8-year-old body trembling from relief and exhaustion. I held him tight, feeling each frantic heartbeat, the smell of sweat mixed with the sharp scent of fear. "Grandma's here, sweetheart. I'm right here." I kissed the top of his head, tears falling into his curls. A victim support worker, a gentlewoman named Carol who specialized in working with children, stood nearby, offering a sad smile. She'd seen too many reunions like this. "He's been waiting for you," Carol said softly. "He kept asking, 'When is Grandma Marcia coming?' over and over." I knelt down so our eyes were level and wiped his tears away with my thumb. His small face was streaked with smudges, probably from when he'd tried to wipe his own cheeks with dirty hands. His eyes were red and swollen. "Are you hurt anywhere? Let Grandma see if you have any injuries." Zayden shook his head, but his lower lip still trembled. "I'm not hurt. But I was really scared, Grandma." "I know, sweetheart, but you're safe now. I'm here with you." "Grandma Marcia." Zayden's voice was barely a whisper. "Did I do something bad? The lady officer said my mom made a mistake, but I didn't do anything bad." The injustice of a child wondering whether they were at fault for the failures of adults made my chest tighten. I hugged Zayden closer. "Listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. Not a single thing. This is the grown-up's fault, not yours." "Where's my mom?" Zayden asked, his small hand clenching my sweater. "Why isn't she here to get me?" Carol caught my eye and gave a slight shake of her head. Tasha wasn't allowed to see Zayden yet, while the investigation was ongoing. Child Protective Services needed to ensure his safety before deciding anything about visitation. "Your mom has to talk to some people first." I chose my words carefully. "But tonight you're staying with me, okay? We'll have dinner, watch a movie, and tomorrow everything will feel a little less scary." Ms. Santos walked over holding a stack of papers, her serious expression making my stomach clench. "Mrs. Ellington, we need to go over the temporary custody arrangements. While we investigate the child endangerment allegations, you'll be the one responsible for Zayden's care." "How long will this last?" "Usually 2 to 4 weeks, she explained. "In cases like this, we have to interview everyone involved, review evidence, and assess the home environment before deciding on any longer-term guardianship." I signed each document, formally accepting responsibility for a child whose mother had chosen a party over his well-being. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had said no to watching him for a few hours so I could attend an important heart appointment, and now I was agreeing to care for him indefinitely, while his mother might be facing criminal charges. If you think everything was fine now just because the child had been found safe, it wasn't. Because that first night, with a terrified child and a grandmother with an unstable heart, was only the beginning of a much larger confrontation with the truth behind this family. The drive home was nearly silent, interrupted only by Zayden's occasional sniffles from the back seat. Before turning onto my street, I pulled into a fast food place to grab dinner, knowing the fridge at home only held portions for one, and the pantry was filled with healthy adult food, not kid-friendly meals. "Grandma Marcia," Zayden spoke up as we turned onto the road leading to my house. Why did the Uber driver take me to the wrong house? I tried to think of a way to explain adult carelessness to a child. "Sometimes handwritten addresses are hard to read," I said. "He thought he was bringing you to my house, but he got mixed up. Did my mom write it wrong?" The driver couldn't read it clearly enough to find the right house. "But I told him I was going to my grandma's house. Why didn't he ask me to show him the way?" The logic of an 8-year-old, yes, Zayden was 8, not 6 as so many people often assumed, cut straight to the heart of every failure in this situation. A strange thought flashed through my mind. Well, turns out I was right. With the way he talks and thinks, 8 makes a lot more sense for Zayden. "I don't know, sweetheart," I sighed. "Adults don't always make the best choices, even when they think they're helping." Once we were inside the house, I realized I was completely unprepared for an overnight guest, let alone for long-term childcare. The spare bedrooms were filled with exercise equipment and craft supplies, no kid's bed or toys in sight. The kitchen was stocked with coffee, oats, and whole grains, not cookies, chocolate milk, or easy kid dinners. The sofa bed in the living room would have to become Zayden's temporary bed. I dug out a few soft blankets and some pillows, trying to turn that corner of the sofa into a cozy nest after a day far too overwhelming for a child. "Grandma Marcia, can I call my dad?" Zayden asked, nibbling on a piece of fried chicken. "Of course, sweetheart." I dialed Jamal's number and put the call on speaker so they could both hear each other. Jamal's voice was raw when he answered. "Zayden, are you okay? I've been worried sick about you." "I'm okay, Dad," Zayden replied with that strange calm you only see in children who have had to grow up too fast. "I'm at Grandma Marcia's house. She bought me dinner." "Where's Mom?" Zayden asked, voicing the question that had been hanging in the air since we left the station. There was a long silence on the other end before Jamal finally said, "Mom has to be somewhere else tonight while everyone figures out what happened. But you're safe with Grandma Marcia. I'll come see you tomorrow, okay?" When the call ended, I helped Zayden get ready for his makeshift bed. He lay on the sofa, wrapped in the blue flannel blanket I'd dug out of the closet, staring up at the ceiling with none of the drowsiness you'd expect from a child about to sleep. "Grandma Marcia, will you sit with me? I don't want to be alone." "Of course, sweetheart." I sat down on the floor, leaning against the sofa, one hand holding his small hand. Zayden's fingers were still dirty, tiny traces of a day filled with trauma. "Grandma Marcia, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When I was sitting at that house, it kept getting darker. There were noises, dogs barking. People walked by and looked at me funny. I was scared they were going to take me." My heart felt like someone was squeezing it. "Oh, sweetheart." I kept thinking, if I was better, if I didn't bother Mom so much, then maybe she wouldn't have sent me away like that. There it was, the warped kind of logic children use to blame themselves for the harm adults cause. I shifted, climbing up onto the sofa to sit beside him and pull him into my arms. "Zayden, listen to me very carefully. You did nothing wrong, absolutely nothing. You are a good, kind, wonderful child. What happened today has nothing to do with whether you're good enough or not. None of this is your fault. But if I was better, there is no if here. You are already good enough. You've always been good enough. Adults made bad decisions, and that's on them, not you." Zayden broke down crying in my arms. Not the quiet tears from before, but deep, wrenching sobs, the kind of crying that comes when a child finally feels safe enough to fall apart. I held him, rocking gently, letting his tears soak through my shirt. "I'm here. I'm not going to let that happen to you again. I promise." Close to 11 p.m., Zayden finally drifted off, his hand still gripping mine as if letting go would make everything disappear again. I stayed on the floor, my back against the sofa, watching him sleep and thinking about the phone call I'd have to make the next morning. My phone buzzed softly, a message from Patricia, my best friend, who'd raised 3 kids and had enough life experience to tell me the hard truths about grandchild custody. "Marcia, my God, are you sure you can handle this? Raising a child full-time is exhausting in the best of circumstances, let alone with everything you've got going on." I typed back with one hand, the other still trapped in Zayden's small grip. "Patricia, of course I'm scared, but this kid was just left alone because his mother wanted to go out. He asked me if his parents are going to get divorced. How am I supposed to look at him and say, 'I can't take care of you'? What about your health? Those heart symptoms?" I thought of my appointment with Dr. Martinez, of the stress test next week, of the chest pains that suddenly felt smaller compared to Zayden's need for one stable adult to make him feel safe. I'll have to figure it out as I go. Right now, he needs stability, and I'm the only family member who is both present and responsible enough to give him that. What about Jamal? Jamal has been letting Tasha do things like this for years without questioning her. He's going to have to prove he can put his son's well-being above his wife's convenience before anyone trusts him with full custody. After sending the message, I put the phone away, walked a slow circle around the quiet house, then came back to stand beside the sofa where Zayden was sleeping. He'd kicked off the blanket, even though the night had turned chilly. I pulled it back over him, tucking it around his small body, and brushed a hand over his cheek. His skin was still warm, his breathing steady and light. Some emergencies, I am learning, will change your life in ways you never planned for or wanted. But there are also changes that are worth embracing, when the alternative is letting innocent children pay the price for their parents' failures. Tomorrow, I'll have to figure out how to balance my own health needs with the responsibility of caring for a child full-time. Tonight, all I can feel is gratitude that Zayden is safe, asleep in a home where his well-being has, finally, become the top priority. The next morning arrived with a series of revelations that made Tasha's betrayal far more cruel than I'd imagined the night before. Zayden woke up early. For the first few seconds he looked around, confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the memories rushed back, and his small face tightened under the weight of yesterday's shock. "I want to go home," he whispered, climbing into my lap as I sat with my morning cup of coffee. "I want everything to go back to normal." "I know, sweetheart." I stroked his back. "I wish it could too." Before I could say more, the doorbell rang. Through the small window, I saw Ms. Santos from Child Protective Services, accompanied by a police officer I hadn't seen before. My stomach clenched immediately. A visit this early rarely brought easy news. "Zayden, why don't you go upstairs and wash your face?" I said gently. "Then you and I will make pancakes." As he ran upstairs, I opened the door. Ms. Santos was holding a thick file, her face carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd spent the entire night reviewing evidence that only got worse the more closely it was examined. "Mrs. Ellington," she said, "we need to talk to you about some new developments in the case. May we come in?" I led them into the living room, choosing a seat where I could still see the upstairs hallway near the bathroom where Zayden was. "What kind of developments?" I asked. Ms. Santos opened the file, spreading out pages that looked like printed social media screenshots mixed with official documents. "We reviewed Tasha Merritt's activities from yesterday," she said slowly, "and the situation is much more serious than the initial report suggested." "More serious? How?" I felt my throat go dry. The officer with her, Officer Collins, looked down at his notes. "Mrs. Merritt wasn't just at a friend's birthday party," he said. "She was at a downtown club with a group of people, some of whom have prior drug-related convictions. Social media posts show her consuming a lot of alcohol and exhibiting behavior that suggests substance use." I felt the blood drain from my face. Substance use. "Instagram stories posted on her account between roughly 4 and 7 p.m., Officer Collins continued, "show her at the party, clearly intoxicated. There's video of her dancing on a table, taking shots of hard liquor, and in one bathroom mirror selfie, she appears to be using what looks very much like cocaine." Ms. Santos slid a few printed screenshots across the table toward me. Looking at them, I felt my stomach twist. Tasha, Zayden's mother, was snorting cocaine in a club bathroom at the very moment her son was curled up alone on the steps of an abandoned house. "But that still isn't everything," Ms. Santos went on. "Last night we questioned Tasha, and her story changed several times. At first," she explained, "Tasha insisted it had been a work emergency. When confronted with evidence that she'd been at a party, Tasha shifted to calling it a networking event related to work. Only when shown her own social media posts did she finally admit it was just a night out, but then claimed she had arranged childcare with me. My daughter-in-law knew perfectly well I had said no yesterday," I said, my voice slow but icy. "She knew I had a doctor's appointment." Officer Collins looked up. "In her statement, she said you were just being difficult," he said, "and that once the child was dropped off, you would have no choice but to watch them." I frowned. "What do you mean, them?" "Oh." Officer Collins glanced at Ms. Santos, then back at me. "You weren't aware?" "Aware of what?" Ms. Santos flipped to another section of the file. "Mrs. Ellington," she said, "this isn't the first time she's used this tactic." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" During questioning, Tasha admitted this isn't the first time she's sent Zayden to relatives' homes by Uber without prior consent, operating under the assumption that family members would feel obligated to take the child in rather than turn away a 6 to 8-year-old left on their doorstep. I thought about all the times in the past year Tasha had called me at the last minute with some kind of emergency. Thought about the times I'd had to swallow a sigh and say no because I already had other plans. Thought about how she always twisted the story so that my fatigue, my limits, and my needs were nothing compared to family responsibility. "So, how many times?" I asked. Ms. Santos checked her notes. "During the interview, Zayden mentioned," she said, her voice softening, "that his mother sometimes sent him to Uncle Marcus's place by Uber when she had important meetings." "Uncle Marcus?" I repeated. "Marcus Merritt," she replied. "Her brother. He works night shifts and has repeatedly told Tasha not to send a child to his apartment unannounced." "So Zayden has been dropped off at other people's homes before without prior arrangements and multiple times?" I asked slowly, needing to be sure I hadn't misheard. "Zayden said," Ms. Santos continued, "that he remembers each time clearly because every time it happened, he was afraid he'd get in trouble. Afraid relatives would be upset, unprepared, and angry at him." She looked me straight in the eye. "This pattern of behavior," she concluded, "legally constitutes child endangerment and ongoing neglect." I turned my head toward the kitchen, where Zayden was trying to manage breakfast on his own, standing on a small stool, carefully reading the cereal box instructions, pouring milk into a bowl, humming quietly to himself, like a tiny adult trying to manage alone because he couldn't trust the grown-ups to do it for him. "So, what happens now?" I asked, my eyes still on him. "Tasha Merritt has officially been charged with child endangerment, reckless endangerment, and child abandonment," Ms. Santos said. "Given the evidence of substance use and the long-term pattern of neglect, we're recommending that temporary custody remain with you while we complete a full investigation." Officer Collins added, "We'll also be investigating what your son, Jamal, knew and whether he bears any complicity in this pattern. Did he know his wife was frequently leaving their son with relatives who hadn't agreed to it?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Jamal tends to accept whatever explanation Tasha gives him without asking many questions." "We'll be interviewing him today," Officer Collins nodded. "Mrs. Ellington, are you willing to continue caring for Zayden for a longer period? The investigation could take several weeks, and depending on the outcome, custody decisions might not remain just temporary." I thought about my heart symptoms, about the stress test next week, about the quiet, retired life I'd carefully built after Ronald's death. Then I looked back at Zayden, a child pouring his own milk, reading the words on a cereal box, softly singing to himself, trying to be braver than his age because the adults who were supposed to protect him hadn't done their job. "Yes," I said without hesitation, "I'll take care of him, for as long as it's needed." If you think we'd hit rock bottom at this point, mother arrested, the truth about the party and drugs exposed, the child temporarily safe with his grandmother, then you're only seeing the surface. Because the hardest part isn't when the police knock on your door. It's when the people inside the family are forced to confront the truth about the role they played in the tragedy. After they left, I sat down at the kitchen table with Zayden to explain what was going to happen next. He listened with the serious focus of a child who has already learned that grown-ups' promises don't always mean much. "For a while, you'll be staying here with me," I said slowly. "There are people working very hard to make sure you're always safe. Your dad will come visit you, but your mom has to work with some people to learn how to take care of you more safely." "Is my mom sick?" Zayden asked, his big eyes fixed on me. "In a way, yes, she is," I replied. "She's made choices that haven't been safe for you. Now she needs help learning how to make better ones." "Like how Tommy's mom had to go away because she drank too much?" Zayden asked. And I realized, 8 years old, and he already had a reference point for understanding addiction and family collapse. "Yes, kind of like that, sweetheart," I said softly. My phone rang. Jamal's number. I answered while Zayden kept stirring his cereal. "Mom," Jamal said, his voice frantic. "I just finished with the police. Tasha's been arrested. They said she was doing drugs at the party while Zayden was missing." "I know," I replied. "Child Protective Services was here this morning." "Mom, I had no idea," Jamal said, his voice a mix of panic and shame. "I knew Tasha went out with friends sometimes, but I thought it was just dinner and some drinks. I didn't know anything about drugs, or her sending Zayden around without permission." "Jamal, how could you not know?" I asked, my tone not just accusatory, but deeply tired. Zayden told the investigator that his mother has dropped him at relatives' houses by Uber multiple times. Silence on the other end. Finally, Jamal said, "I work long hours, Mom." He protested weakly. "Tasha handles most of the childcare. When she says she's arranged a sitter, I believe her." "Even when those sitters were complaining about a child suddenly appearing on their doorstep?" I pressed. "What about Marcus? She sent Zayden to his apartment while he was working nights, even after he told her not to, Jamal." I could hear the heavy pause on the other end, the silence of someone being forced to confront just how many red flags they'd chosen not to see. "So, what do I have to do to get my son back?" Jamal finally asked, his voice breaking. "You have to prove that you can protect him from his mother's negligence," I said, each word deliberate. "And Jamal, you also need to ask yourself this: how did you miss so many patterns of your son being put in danger for so many years?" Some conversations, I'm learning, require hard truths that cannot be softened by family loyalty. And some parents, whether mothers or fathers, have to accept that they must earn back the right to be trusted with their own child's well-being. 2 weeks after I was granted temporary custody, my entire routine revolved around Zayden. He started wetting the bed, panicking whenever he couldn't see me in the room. Clear reactions from a child who had just gone through abandonment. On Tuesday morning, while I was helping him with math, Dr. Martinez's office called to remind me that I'd missed my heart follow-up. I looked at a calendar crammed with notes about school, the dentist, and then my own test. My life stretched so thin it was hard to breathe. I explained that I was taking care of Zayden full-time and couldn't leave him home alone. The scheduling staff gently reminded me, "If you have a cardiac event, what will happen to him?" That question hit straight at the fear I'd been trying so hard to avoid. Eventually, they arranged for a child life specialist to stay with Zayden while I did the tests. The appointment was set for Thursday morning. I had to prepare Zayden emotionally. Just hearing the word hospital made him think of his grandpa Ronald, and he asked the questions I had no perfect answers for. What if it's like Grandpa? All I could promise was that I would do everything in my power to stay healthy and stay with him. Thursday morning, a light rain was falling, and Zayden had a stomachache from anxiety, but still came with me to the clinic. Jennifer, the child life specialist, took him to the kids' playroom. He tried to act brave, but he still held my hand as tightly as he could. The stress test left me gasping for breath, while Dr. Martinez watched every heartbeat closely. After that, I had the echocardiogram done. When everything was finished, he told me, "You have mitral valve regurgitation. We caught it early. It can be managed with medication." I exhaled so deeply I felt dizzy. No surgery, no hospital admission, but I would need regular follow-ups, medication, and to avoid overexertion. I asked him the only question that truly mattered to me. "Can I still take care of Zayden?" "Yes," he confirmed, "but you must take care of yourself first." When I went back to the children's room, Zayden ran to hug me tightly, his eyes red from fear. I spoke softly. "I'm okay. I just have to take medicine." On the drive home, he stayed quiet for a long time, then asked, "So, does that mean you're getting older?" "Yes, but not so old that I can't take care of you," I replied. That night, after Zayden had fallen asleep, I sat in front of the new heart medication box. I understood more clearly than ever that my time wasn't infinite. I had to use the years I had left to help him grow strong, stronger than the fears he was carrying. Some people build family by choice, not blood. As for me, I choose to stay, to love, and to stand on Zayden's side, even when my heart is no longer as strong as it once was. Tomorrow, I'll start taking the medication. And tomorrow, I'll also keep learning how to be the anchor he needs. That Saturday morning, the first visitation day for Jamal since the temporary guardianship agreement was signed, did not begin with laughter or the excitement of a child. It began with fear. Zayden sat in front of his bowl of cereal, both hands gripping the spoon so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "I don't want to go to school anymore, Grandma," he said softly. "The kids keep asking me why I'm living with you. I don't know how to answer." Every question from the other children, innocent or casual, was like a cut across a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. I spent nearly 2 hours trying to coax him into taking a few bites while reassuring him that going to school was still important, even when life was falling apart. Right then, there was a knock at the door. Jamal stood on the porch with a bouquet of flowers in his hand, the gaunt face of a man who had finally realized what he'd neglected for years. "Mom, thank you for taking care of him," he said, his voice hoarse and tired. "I know. This is not what you imagined for your retirement years." I stepped aside to let him in. Jamal was visibly thinner, his eyes bloodshot, his whole demeanor weighed down like someone who hadn't slept for 3 weeks. "Dad!" Zayden threw himself into Jamal's arms, holding on as if he were afraid that letting go meant losing him forever. "How are you doing, buddy?" Jamal asked, pulling his son down onto the sofa. "We're starting to get used to things," I said slowly, choosing each word carefully because Zayden was now sensitive to every adult conversation. Life changed really fast. Everyone is having to learn how to adjust. A brief silence fell. Then, the question no father ever wants to hear from the mouth of his 8-year-old son. "Dad, how come you didn't know Mom was using drugs?" The room seemed to freeze. Jamal closed his eyes, his face breaking open into something raw and undeniable. Pure regret. "Son, I should have known," he answered, his voice trembling. "That's my fault, not yours, and not your grandma's." "Are you going to take us back home?" Zayden asked next. "Not yet, sweetheart." Jamal swallowed hard. "I have to prove that I can take care of you better than I did before." "Prove it? Why?" Jamal looked at me, eyes pleading for a way forward that wouldn't break his child even more. "Because Grandma Marcia has taken better care of you than Dad and Mom did," he admitted. "You're safe here. You're at peace here. And I have to learn how to give you that too." For the first time in 8 years, I heard Jamal speak as a real father, not just as a man avoiding responsibility. The morning passed in a heavy, thick silence, the silence of people trying to glue back together a shattered mirror. Jamal could see his own failures in it. I could see my responsibility for this child's future. And Zayden was just trying to find one small corner of the world where he could feel safe. When Jamal left, promising to come back the following weekend and to call Zayden every Tuesday night, the boy sat down beside me, his face wearing that familiar, serious expression of a little adult. "Grandma Marcia, do you think Dad will really get better?" "I think your dad wants to change," I replied. "Whether he can actually do it depends on whether he's willing to do the hardest things." "What are the hardest things?" "Putting you first, even when that's inconvenient. Learning to ask questions instead of believing every easy explanation. And protecting you from the bad choices adults make." Zayden nodded, the kind of nod that belongs to a child who has already learned that promises are easy, actions are not. "Grandma, if Dad gets better and we have to go live with him, will you still be my grandma?" A small question. But inside it was the fear of being abandoned all over again. I wrapped him in my arms. "Zayden, where you live doesn't change that. You're already a piece of my heart." "You promise?" "I promise." That afternoon, while he was taking a nap, my phone rang. The cardiology clinic. The nurse's worried voice came through. Mrs. Ellington, delaying your heart evaluation could be life-threatening. I swallowed. I understand, but I'm taking care of my grandson full-time. I can't leave him alone. Then what will happen to him if you have a cardiac event? That question pierced straight into the fear I'd been hiding the deepest. Once again, I had to arrange to bring Zayden along and rely on a child life specialist to stay with him while I underwent testing. And once again, I heard the diagnosis that made my hands go cold. Mitral valve regurgitation. Manageable, but requiring continuous monitoring. There are some tests, I am learning, that don't just save one heart, they save a child's future. And some grandmothers have to face the terrifying truth that their own health might be the very thing that decides their grandchild's fate. 6 months after I officially became Zayden's primary caregiver, I received the phone call I had both feared and waited for all this time. Ms. Santos from Child Protective Services called, asking to schedule a home visit to talk about long-term options for Zayden, about his custodial future. Mrs. Ellington, we need to evaluate both options to determine what is in Zayden's best interest, she said. Jamal has made significant progress, but Zayden has also been thriving under your care. I looked around the living room. The room that had once been the quiet space of a widow now turned into a buzzing beehive of life, with books, school supplies, drawings, colored paper, crayons, little shoes tossed around, and half-finished Lego projects on the floor. A very specific kind of mess that only appears when a child feels safe enough to take over the house. When do we have to make a decision? I asked. Within a month, Ms. Santos replied. We'll interview Zayden about what he wants, evaluate both living environments, then make a recommendation to the family court judge. After hanging up, I knew I had to prepare Zayden, not just for the paperwork, but emotionally. Zayden, come sit with me for a moment, okay? I need to talk to you about something. He sat down close beside me, those brown eyes wide with the familiar worry I'd come to recognize too well. Ms. Santos called today, I began. She wants to talk to you about whether, in the future, you want to keep living with me or go back to living with your dad. We have to choose, Grandma? Zayden's voice trembled noticeably. The people who make the decisions need to understand what you want and what makes you feel the safest and happiest, I said slowly. They can't just listen to the adults talk to each other. They need to hear from you, too. Grandma Marcia, if we choose to live with Dad, will you still love us? I pulled him into a hug and squeezed gently. Zayden, my love for you has nothing to do with whether your bed is at Dad's house or Grandma's house. No matter where you live, you're still my grandchild. You're still part of my heart. 3 days later, Jamal came over carrying a photo album and some printed architectural plans. He laid everything out on the dining table. Buddy, I want to show you something, he said. He opened the pages. Photos of the remodeled house, a new playroom with bookshelves, a repainted bedroom, a backyard with a fence, and a new play set. I changed jobs, Jamal said. Now I can work from home 3 days a week so I can be with you. Ms. Patterson next door will help watch you after school. What about Mom? Zayden asked, his tone careful, like he was stepping out onto thin ice. Your mom and I are getting a divorce, Jamal said plainly. She'll be living somewhere else and getting help to deal with her issues. Zayden stared at the pictures for a long time, his finger tracing the new paint colors, the new bed, the new bookshelf. Dad, why are you only changing everything now? He asked. Why didn't you make it better back when we still lived there? Jamal's face fell. Because I didn't realize how much better it could be, he admitted. Grandma Marcia showed me what real care looks like. Now I'm just trying to catch up. After Jamal left, Zayden turned to me. Grandma, do you think we should give Dad another chance? I think you should choose what feels most right to you, I said. But Zayden, I've already proven I can take good care of you. Your dad has to prove he can do the same. Zayden was quiet for quite a while. Grandma, maybe "We could try," he said softly. "But if it doesn't go well, can we come back here?" "Zayden, this will always be your home," I replied. "No matter what happens, you will always have a place here with me." There was a period after that when everything felt like it was standing at a crossroads. We were no longer in the chaotic crisis of those first days when Zayden went missing, but we were also far from any neat ending. Zayden began living between two worlds. On one side, the house filled with drawings and steady routines at my place. On the other, the house Jamal was rebuilding from scratch, not just with bricks, wood, and paint, but with presence, responsibility, and new choices. It was a time when every small decision, one evening, one phone call, one moment of silence, or one apology, could tip the scales. And more than anyone else, Zayden was the one who felt each shift most keenly. The formal transition meeting took place in April. Zayden sat in the middle, Jamal on one side, me on the other. Judge Williams glanced through the file, then looked up at us. "We're recommending joint custody," he said. "Jamal will be the primary residential parent, and Mrs. Marcia will be the secondary caregiver, with a defined visitation schedule and shared decision-making over medical, educational, and other major issues." "What we want to know," Zayden suddenly spoke up, making every eye in the room turn toward him, "is what happens if Dad stops taking good care of me again, later?" The question dropped into the courtroom like a stone into a still pond, not loud, but sending ripples through everyone present. An 8-year-old child, in the middle of court, asking, "Who will protect me if the grown-ups fail me again?" "Zayden," Judge Williams said gently, "if you ever feel unsafe, you can call your Grandma Marcia any time. She can contact us, and we'll check immediately. You will not be forced to stay in any situation that puts you in danger." The transition happened slowly. Zayden spent more and more time at Jamal's house, as if he were testing whether these new promises were stronger than the old ones. The first real test came on a Tuesday evening in May. "Mom, I'm at the ER with Zayden," Jamal called, his voice panicked. "He fell off his bike. His arm might be broken. Can you come?" I arrived at the hospital to find Zayden sitting on an exam bed, trying to be brave but with red eyes and tightly pressed lips. "Grandma." He reached for me, and I immediately wrapped him in a hug, feeling the lingering tremor in his shoulders. "Mom," Jamal said, his words tumbling over one another. "I should have watched him more closely. I should have—" "Jamal, stop," I cut in. "Accidents happen. What matters is that you brought him here right away, and that you're here now." The doctor confirmed it was just a simple fracture. A cast and time would heal it. But I couldn't help noticing the way Jamal talked to the doctor. He asked detailed questions, wrote down instructions, followed up on aftercare. He was no longer a bystander in his son's life. "Mrs. Ellington," the doctor said, "your son did a very good job preparing everything. Having complete medical records helped us treat Zayden much faster." Afterward, we went to a nearby ice cream shop as a kind of emotional recovery ritual for Zayden. As he licked his ice cream, he asked, "Grandma, do you think Dad is taking good care of me?" "I think your dad is trying very hard," I answered. "And when you got hurt, he knew exactly what he needed to do." "I like living with Dad. The house is big. I have my own room," Zayden said, then turned to look at me. "But I still want to see you all the time." "You'll always see me," I replied. "Every Wednesday, every other weekend, and any time you need me." 3 months later, another phone call came to test this new balance. Tasha was about to be released after 8 months and wanted to see Zayden. "Mrs. Ellington," Ms. Santos explained over the phone, "Tasha has completed rehab and parenting classes. The court is considering allowing supervised visitation. Zayden said he wants to see her, but only if you're there too." I agreed, but I was clear. If I see any behavior that threatens Zayden's stability, I will end the visit immediately. The first visit took place at the Family Services Center. Zayden gripped my hand so tightly the knuckles were white. "What if she asks me to come live with her?" he whispered. "Then you tell her the truth," I replied. You're living with Dad and you feel happy. Being honest doesn't mean being cruel. Tasha arrived on time, something she rarely managed before. She was thinner, her hair cut short, and the wild, scattered look in her eyes had been replaced by a strange kind of steadiness. "Zayden," her voice cracked. "Baby, I've missed you so much, I thought I would lose my mind." "Hi, Mom," Zayden said, standing at a slight distance, not immediately running into her arms the way some children might. "Can I hug you?" Tasha asked, not moving closer until he nodded. Zayden stepped forward and allowed her to hug him, but his body stayed stiff, as if his mind were still hovering over the brakes. They sat at the table, coloring and playing games. After a while, Tasha took a deep breath. "Zayden, I want to say I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry I put you in that Uber that day. I'm sorry I was using drugs when you needed me the most. I'm sorry I wasn't the kind of mother you deserved." "Are you still using drugs?" Zayden asked bluntly. No pretense, no detours. "No, sweetheart," Tasha shook her head. "I've been clean for 8 months. She took out several recovery chips, each one marking a stretch of sobriety. "Every day I don't go back to drugs, I get a little better. I want you to see that I'm really working on this." Zayden examined the chips carefully. "Grandma Marcia says I have to look at what people do, not just listen to what they say." Tasha turned to me, truly facing me for the first time. "She's absolutely right," Tasha said quietly. "I know I'll have to prove it with my actions. It's going to take time, but I'm ready." On the way home, Zayden asked again, "Grandma, do you think Mom is really changing?" "I think your mom wants to change," I replied. "Whether she actually does, that takes time and consistency. We'll let the next days of sobriety speak for themselves." 2 years after the night that Uber turned down the wrong street, I stood in the kitchen getting ready for Zayden's 10th birthday party. My small kitchen now had to host a big celebration: cake, balloons, snacks, paper cups, paper plates, and a guest list that, if someone had read it to me 2 years earlier, I would have laughed in disbelief. Jamal arrived with his new wife, Sarah. Tasha came with her boyfriend Marcus, whom she'd met in her recovery program. I had grown used to being the axis this strange, expanded family spun around. The road to this point had not been smooth. Those early visits with Tasha were tense, full of awkward silences and late tears. But over 18 months, she was consistent, attending group meetings, sticking with treatment, keeping every appointment, showing up for Zayden on time, talking less and doing more. Slowly, supervised visits turned into structured weekend visits. "Grandma Marcia, don't you think it's weird that we have such a big family now?" Zayden asked as he hung streamers. I glanced over. Jamal and Sarah were putting candles on the cake. Tasha and Marcus were setting up an easel for a surprise gift. The kids were racing around the backyard. "I find it more interesting than weird," I smiled. "Interesting that after everything almost fell apart, everyone somehow found a new way to be a family. Even when it's really hard?" "Exactly because it's hard. That's what makes it worth it," I replied. "Easy love doesn't teach you much. Love that goes through hardship, that's what shows you who people really are." At exactly 2 p.m., the backyard was crowded with more than 10 kids and several adults. The good kind of noisy. Laughter, shouting names, camera shutters clicking, the neighbor's dog barking along. Tasha brought out a large easel and a box of art supplies. "Oh my gosh, Mom, this is exactly what I wanted," Zayden squealed. "I wanted a big easel so I can paint big pictures." "I remember how much you love drawing," Tasha said with a smile. "I thought we could sign up for an art class together on the weekends when I get to see you. How does that sound?" "I want that," Zayden said without hesitation. This time, there was no guardedness in his eyes, only genuine excitement. As the party wound down, I stood with Jamal and Tasha, watching Zayden show the other kids how to mix colors. "Marcia," Tasha said, her voice hesitant but sincere, "I want to thank you, again, for stepping in when I completely failed." "You don't have to keep thanking me," I shook my head. "Taking care of Zayden isn't a burden. It's a blessing." "But you gave up your retirement years," Tasha said quietly. "Your health was affected, your heart." I thought about the woman I used to be, living quietly in a peaceful home, days blurring into one another. Then I looked over at my grandson, who had spent the afternoon laughing, his hands covered in paint. Tasha, those terrible choices back then led to some of the best things in my life, I said slowly. Zayden changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. Mom, Jamal added, I still don't understand how you managed all of it. Taking on guardianship, caring for him, then teaching me how to be a better father, and even making space for Tasha to rebuild her life. Jamal, once you really started paying attention, you became a good father, I said. Tasha, when you got clean and took responsibility, you became a good mother. I just kept the house standing until the two of you were ready to do your part. When most of the guests had gone, Zayden ran over and dropped down beside my chair. Grandma Marcia, that day when you said no to babysitting me so you could see the doctor, did you know you were saving our whole family? No, sweetheart, I smiled sadly. That day I only knew one thing. If I didn't look after my own health, then when you needed me later, I might not be here. But we did need you, Zayden said, leaning his head on my shoulder. And now, we still do. And I need you, I replied. You give me a reason to get up every morning, a kind of love only a grandmother can understand. That night, driving home, I passed the turn where that Uber had gone the wrong way years ago. I remembered the little boy sitting on the steps of an abandoned house, and then pictured the 10-year-old who had just spent the afternoon racing around a backyard, surrounded by a new, more stable, healthier family. The mistake that seemed like the worst thing that could have happened had led to the best possible outcome: a child who finally feels safe, adults who were forced to grow up, and a grandmother who learned that saying no at the right moment isn't selfish. It's the only way she could say yes to the responsibilities that truly mattered. Some families aren't destroyed by crisis. They're reborn through it. Some kinds of love require painful boundaries, hard decisions, and the courage to put children's needs above adult comfort. And some grandmothers discover that by protecting their own heart and health, they don't just save themselves, they keep their hands strong enough to catch the children who are falling. If you're still listening to this point, thank you for staying with me and with Zayden's story. If you believe there are grandmothers out there brave enough to say no in order to protect what's right, please subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and share this story with someone you think could use a little more hope. Because somewhere out there, a child might also be waiting for an adult brave enough to stand up for them.